Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, June 30th. It's the end of June. Get out of here, June. We've had enough of you. You've been very pleasant. Why couldn't we keep you around longer? We'll never know. That's just the way time is. Linear, for the most part, until we discover ways around that. We'll see whether it's possible. Ooh, just hold on. Maybe by the end of the show. Or, more likely, whenever we get it, I'll use the machine to come back to the end of this show and let you know. Oh, I better write this date down. What a promise. All right, well, I've just turned time-space on its head. That's one thing we gotten done on today's show. Or will. Boy, this is very difficult to deal with now. There's a lot of complications in time travel. Anyway, I haven't done it yet. We'll get to it later. Wrapping up June. Lots of news happening. People still are, I guess, spending their day arguing about whether or not the former guy lunged or didn't lunge or went for clavicles or not clavicles or what are clavicles and are they the sort of thing that you would warm in your heart? No, those are cockles, not clavicles. Whatever, I don't know. And then fighting over whether or not it was proper to refer to the SUV limousine as the Beast. I was a little confused about that when Greg brought it up the other day. So there's been some confusion, I guess, at some point. And Cassidy Hutchinson, in telling her story, I think, referred to all of the limousines essentially as beasts. And probably it was improper, but it's got everyone in a tizzy, and they're all trying to figure out exactly what happened. But what happened was that he rode back from the Ellipse rally in the SUV thing, no matter what it's called. Whether or not he lunged for anything, well, I guess that's still to be determined, but as others have pointed out, one person told a story about hearing that story under oath, and the other people haven't shown up to say anything except having people close to them, or rather sources close to the place they work for, say, well, it's not exactly quite like that. Well, there's a lot of not exactly quite like that stories floating around today. And, noting another one, as a matter of fact, for instance, there's the story that Greg Dworkin hasn't called in yet. Well, that's not exactly true either, you see? So it's very tricky to report the news and get all the nuance right. And in the future, I will know exactly when Greg called in, so that if I ever travel back in time and remind myself to redo the show properly, I'll know that he calls it 9:04 and not to start in on any other subjects. Okay, so you must have something to get started about.
9:06.
Well, yeah, but if you did that, then I'd know, and I'd write that down. Although, you know what? I probably wouldn't write that down. If I got a hold of a time machine, I would screw everything up. I'd be like, all right, well, all I have to do is go back. I almost never
call in at 9:03 unless I hear on the radio there that you're stuck.
Right, I can't get my drinks or my breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. You need tea or
but maybe you've got something to do today.
Something, or the support staff needs to get off to school, whatever it is.
Right. No such problems today, but how do I know they won't arise in the future? I don't yet, but when I do find out.
Speaking of the past and the present, let alone the future, in a past show, which is to say yesterday, we were speculating on why the committee chose to report when they reported.
Oh, right, yes.
And I raised the specter of maybe it was because they really wanted to put pressure on Pat Cipollone.
Patsy Baloney. That's, I'm pretty sure, his mob name.
Well, you know what?
What?
They wanted to put pressure on Patsy Baloney.
Patsy Baloney! Come on in here.
They wanted to. As a matter of fact, they've subpoenaed Patsy Baloney.
All right.
And there's a lot of that backstory that I want to go over because I think it's sort of interesting and important, but mostly interesting.
Back to the story.
The future. This is from Punchbowl yesterday. The January 6th Select Committee is likely to subpoena Patsy Baloney. They described it as Pat Cipollone, which I think, is crazy because everybody spells Cipollone wrong, and nobody spells Patsy Baloney wrong.
You're not going to get that wrong. Patsy Baloney. Come over here.
You got it?
Yeah.
You mook. Okay, so here's the thing.
By
they
the way, you
did
should see how the closed
subpoena
caption
Patsy
that.
Baloney. The White House counsel under former President Donald Trump in the coming weeks, unless he agrees to be deposed or to testify voluntarily. Now, again, one piece of interesting tidbit here, and then I'll give you another. First, Cipollone has spoken to the committee on an informal basis. What that means is that no transcript, no video. They want him to come and talk to them so that they can have a transcript, but more importantly, they can have a video for their TV show about the hearings.
Here's where he said this thing. Play it.
And there's him saying this thing, which they can tease, ad infinitum, and it gets on the nightly news. And so it's important, and it's not just stagecraft to do that, but he's talked to the committee. They sort of have an idea of what's going on here. And again, time after time after time, the committee would say something which seems to be a little sensational out on a limb there, like, there were people who were leading tours. No, I wasn't. Well, here's the video of you leading a tour. There were people who were asking for pardons in the Republican House. No, I wasn't. No, I wasn't. Well, here is the deposition under oath of somebody who said, yeah, you did. And here's the transcript, and here's the text message, and here's the email. Oh. So now they go and they give this very compelling narrative, drama, about what happened in the Suburban, also known as the SUV, also colloquially known as the Beast, even though it isn't because that's reserved for the limo, but then again, it's not a golf cart. So this happens, and I'm going to go over some of the players. But meanwhile, Cipollone's sort of part and parcel of some of this, because after all, Cipollone was one of the people who came in and told Mark Meadows, even though you're reluctant, he said to Meadows, you got to stop this or blood's going to be on your effing hands.
Yeah, effing.
And that was a first hand, I heard it, not a second hand, somebody told me the story.
Yes.
So Cipollone's wrapped up with a lot of this. Now, Peter Alexander simultaneously is reporting that Cipollone, I love the way they phrase this in Washington terms. Maybe you could help explain it. A lawyer familiar with Cipollone's thinking told Peter Alexander that Cipollone needed a subpoena in order to be compelled to testify, and he's going over the ground rules of what is and what is not covered by executive privilege. And that's where it stands right now. So all that pressure that the committee's putting on him is having some sort of effect.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, we can only guess at what the source was, but it sounds like the source is...
Well, it was a lawyer who's familiar with what Pat Cipollone dreams about.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that's the guy who will be Patsy Baloney's lawyer if he gets subpoenaed. But since at that point he hadn't been subpoenaed...
Bad because you can't have a client, you can't be the client of yourself. If you're a lawyer.
Well, so he needs a lawyer. But the lawyer says, I'm not representing Cipollone now because he hasn't been subpoenaed. I'm familiar with his thinking because he asked me, hey, if I get subpoenaed, will you be my lawyer? Yes, but I'm not your lawyer now, so you can't cite me as Cipollone's lawyer.
Or it was Patsy Baloney himself.
Oh, well, that's true, too. That could always be the case. Although I have my doubts about how familiar with his thinking
You were talking to Patsy Baloney.
Yeah, that's right.
He represents John Barron.
Also, by the way, known as Patsy or Pat Abalone as another one. So the closed captioning machines had a great time with the Hutchinson testimony about Pat Cipollone. He was named all sorts of things.
And again, nobody spells it right. So after Tuesday's blockbuster appearance, says Punchbowl, by Cassidy Hutchinson, former top aide to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, committee insiders tell us it's imperative that Cipollone provide more information to the panel. Cipollone and the Select Committee were in active discussion to have him testify publicly. And reminder, Hutchinson testified that Cipollone was very concerned about the attack on the Capitol, though Trump and other White House officials downplayed the possibility of violence. What's this about violence on TV? Hutchinson also testified that Cipollone warned Meadows that Trump supporters on January 6 wanted to hang Mike Pence, to which Meadows replied that Trump believed Pence deserved it.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, he's a good guy.
And a reminder from Punchbowl that although Cipollone can mull over executive privilege claim, there is no such privilege claim when you're talking about Meadows. Those conversations are not privileged.
Oh, not attorney-client privilege
Right.
anyway, yeah.
Well, in terms of the OLC and what its role is, it isn't to protect Mark Meadows.
Right.
It's to protect the office.
Yeah, I guess that's true. That's a fine way of imagining it. Why not?
And sources tell us that Cipolloni's
It's working
discussions
for me.
about the Capitol riot, efforts to overturn the election, potential crimes don't fall within the president's official duties.
Yes.
So forget executive privilege. He'll testify. The question's going to be under what circumstances. And by the way, as the kids say, if he did, it's going to be lit. So let's go over
Okay.
some of
very
the
hip.
players here again, because I think they're important as they discuss this.
All right.
Before I get to that, though, I want to mention something. This is the Washington Post story. January 6th committee subpoenas former White House counsel Pat Cipollone. They do not put Patsy Baloney in the headline because I guess they're not closed captioned. The decision followed extensive negotiations between Cipollone and the committee. I just want to, again, point out the committee's talking to these people. They're not just making this stuff up and then throwing it out there. Just keep that in the back of your
Hey,
mind.
we're talking here.
Yeah. In the weeks since, the Select Committee has continued to obtain evidence about which you are uniquely positioned to testify. Unfortunately, you've declined to cooperate further, including by providing on-the-record testimony. We're left with no choice but to issue this subpoena, they say. And then yesterday, not during the hearing day, it wasn't the Red Rum hearing day, it was the day after. It's time for Mr. Cipollone to testify on the record, Cheney tweeted at 5:50 a.m. Any concerns he has about the institutional interests of his prior office are outweighed by the need for his testimony. And the subpoena may provide cover for Cipollone to cooperate with the committee, as Trump and his allies have sought to keep those in the former president's orbit from providing committee with potentially damaging information.
Shoot.
Now, it says right here, but you heard it here first on the show, today's surprise hearing was designed in part to ramp up pressure on reluctant witnesses like Cipollone, according to those involved with the investigation. So it isn't just me saying it. It's people involved with the investigation saying it.
People who are familiar with the thinking of the people involved in the investigation.
Right. People who are familiar with the thinking of the lawyer who's familiar with Cipollone's thinking said
He's thinking.
he can probably give the best overview of how Meadows, Giuliani, and Trump were told what they were doing might be illegal.
Yes. Well, all right.
Right? And Cheney has said behind the scenes, Cipollone's like a big win. You got to get that one. It's a get, as they like to say in the business.
We're glad we got him.
And
So
we're
good.
only at the midpoint of the hearings, and there's a lot more to come.
All right. So tomorrow, 1 pound of Cipollone, 1 pound of gabagool.
Right. There are lots of things Cipollone believes he shouldn't talk about, said one advisor, a Trump advisor who keeps in touch with Cipollone. He still respects the guy more than the way he should, given the way he was treated. He's not going to go in and start talking about everything. He'd be super narrow, and he's a very careful guy. He has strong beliefs in the institution and that he should keep privilege. And a second person said Cipollone's still a devoted Republican and believes that Democrats in the House had overreached in their investigations of Trump. One Trump ally said he didn't think Cipollone should testify. That's Lindsey Graham. And, that doesn't mean he won't. So the more that comes out, the more he's likely to testify. And I think that's, again, part and parcel of the reason they did what they did. Now, let's set up some of the players for you with the, what should we call it? The telenovela.
Oh, all right.
About what's going on in the SUV, in the Suburban.
Sure. Okay.
In the Proto-Beast. Can Trump Secret Service agent be forced to testify, says the Washington Post. Well, Clinton's was.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a precedent there. In 1998, several agents protecting Bill Clinton were compelled to testify before a grand jury about the president's affair with a young intern as he was being investigated by independent counsel Ken Starr. The too long didn't read version is that the Secret Service tried to make the case that you can't start getting Secret Service people to testify because if you do, the president will never trust them. And that's important in a life and death situation where the president is literally next to the Secret Service. So it's a bad idea. It's a bad precedent. And Ken Starr said, we're on a witch hunt. Get out of our way. And the courts agreed with Ken Starr. And so everything was changed from that point onward.
Okay. Well, that explains it. I mean, it was a bad idea, but okay, they needed to get at the truth. We all recognize that, and it'll apply to all presidents going forward. So now you know you're on record. Oh, wait, no, we'd like to go back.
Right, so it's a little tidbit I didn't know. But in her 2021 book, Zero Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service, Washington Post reporter Carol Leonard, very good reporter, got a behind-the-scenes look at how the agents reacted to the subpoenas. In short, they hated it.
Mm-hmm.
So we can understand that.
Sure.
So now let's set up some of the players as we go back to the telenovela and see what really happened and how we get to the truth, if there is a truth to be gotten to.
Telenovela.
Right? Keith Kellogg. Remember Keith Kellogg?
I do.
You heard the name.
Mm-hmm.
But people, our listeners, may not remember Keith Kellogg was a key player because of who he was, retired lieutenant general, who took Mike Flynn's place as national security advisor.
You did?
Yeah. So Keith Kellogg was like high up on the chain.
Reason. Okay.
All right. And then another
that was an HR
piece
stuff?
of this. Okay. This is Olivia Troy. Do you remember Olivia Troy?
Yeah, right. Yes, I do.
All right. One of the things about Keith Kellogg that is important to keep in mind is some of the jobs that he had during the Trump administration.
Right.
Okay. He was, as you know, a foreign policy advisor to Trump, and then he became national security advisor. But before that,
totally don't remember that. Okay. Yes.
He worked for Mike Pence.
Well,
he chose Kellogg to serve as his national security advisor. Olivia Troy was also a security advisor to Mike Pence. Yes. So these are Republicans, solid Republicans, but they sort of come out of the Pence camp, and that's going to be important as we tell the telenovela story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Olivia Troy, American national security official, you've probably seen her on TV, went to work in the office of Vice President of the U.S. as the Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, served on the Coronavirus Task Force, so she had a lot of input and insight into what was going on with Scott Atlas and some of the nutcases there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then Tony Ornato. Tony Ornato is the one that told the story about what happened in the Suburban that was overheard and told to Cassidy Hutchinson. So she could testify, as you pointed out yesterday. She was told this story by Ornato, and here's what the story was about.
Tony Ornato, here I come.
Okay.
Yes.
Tony Ornato was a deputy in the White House who was essentially in charge of Secret Service movements. And as the televisions have been telling us, there's two kinds of movement. There's a scheduled White House movement, which you generally do in the Beast, the limo.
Right. Oh,
and there's an OTR, off-the-record movement, when at the last minute you change your plans, and so the more nimble SUV is used. You would do that if suddenly something came up. You would do that if you're trying to avoid the press.
Something suddenly came up. Right. I guess so. Sure.
Right. And the person who's responsible for coordinating the Secret Service movements is Tony Ornato. He's a totally Trump guy.
Yes. Now,
I think he is somebody who is all in for Donald Trump. And so it's important to remember that. As Olivia Troy tweets, Tony Ornato sure seems to deny conversations he's apparently had. First, there was this one with Keith Kellogg, who we just went over.
Right.
Keith Kellogg, the Trump guy. In I Alone Can Fix It. And now he's denying the story he told Cassidy Hutchinson. Those of us who work with Tony know where his loyalties lie. He should testify under oath. But wait, there's more, because let me tell you the story. This is from the Washington Post. I guess it's an excerpt from that book. Trump said nothing more. He didn't express any hope that Pence was okay. He didn't try to call the vice president to check on him. He just stayed in the dining room watching television. Around this time, Keith Kellogg, and now you know who he is, Trump is a Pence guy working in the Trump administration, ran into Tony Ornato, a Trump guy working in the Trump administration in the West Wing. Ornato, who oversaw Secret Service movements, told him that Pence's detail was planning to move the vice president to Joint Base Andrews. You remember this story? Pence didn't want to get in the car. Remember that?
Right.
You can't do that, Tony, Kellogg said. You can't do that, Trump guy, said Pence guy.
Right.
Leave him where he's at. He's got a job to do. I know you guys too well. You'll fly him to Alaska if you have a chance. Don't do it. He's going to stay there. Pence guy told Trump guy. If he has to wait all night, he's going to do it. And then, parenthetically, right after that, Ornato, through his spokesman, denied having this conversation.
Aha. I would deny that one, sure.
Right? So first he denied that one, Olivia Troy reminds us, and then he's denying the story he told Cassidy Hutchinson. Now, I wasn't there for either one of the stories, but I know Tony, and he's a liar.
Yeah, huh.
So keep that in mind. The guy who wanted to whisk Pence out of the Capitol so that Trump can swoop in and finish the counting.
Yeah.
Right, this is my interpretation, because yesterday the question was twofold. Why is the committee having what they had when they had it? And the answer is to put pressure on Patsy Baloney.
Sure.
And then
All right.
why, as Carl Bernstein asked, did Trump want to get to the Capitol so badly? And the answer is, in his fevered mind, or a potential answer, should I say,
It's a good one.
is that Trump wanted to whisk Pence away through the auspices of Tony Ornato and do the counting himself.
Yeah, either that or, appoint someone to the chair like...
Well, whatever. I don't think
Ashley,
Trump knows
yeah.
enough to appoint somebody to the chair.
Or,
and if he's going to declare martial law because of look what's going on, he doesn't need to appoint nobody.
That's true. He
I
could
got
do it
your
himself.
appointment right here.
He could, at
I'm
that
in
point,
charge.
maybe turn to, somebody he trusts in the Senate and say, I don't know what to do up here, but do the thing I need to do so that I win.
And if you think that I'm putting a sinister spin on all of this, you haven't been paying attention.
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, what else would he be going to the Capitol for? If at the minimum, he's going to, deliver some sort of emergency victory speech.
Right, so it's all
control
interesting, part of the telenovela. My point is, this is who Tony Ornato is.
Yes.
So when Tony Ornato said, I didn't
All
say
right.
that, you have to put that in context. He's a Trump guy, and the Pence people didn't trust him at all. And you also have to put into perspective, Olivia Troy says, I know him and I don't trust him, but she's a Pence person.
That. Well, all right.
And Kellogg didn't trust him, and he's a Pence person.
Yeah.
And everybody who was
There's a lot of
Pence person
non-trust
didn't trust him.
on.
And there was a reason they didn't trust him, and that's because he would basically lie for Trump. Everybody knew that.
Yeah, that's all true. Lots of people say that. In fact, our
People
Twitter friend Sponson was prevailing upon me yesterday to stay open to the possibility that Ornato set the thing up, that he very intentionally told this story that he was hoping to later deny, telling it to Hutchinson because he didn't trust her.
Nah, I don't think the Mook is that smart.
It's hard to know. But his theory was that it was all about the then impending impeachment, and they didn't think that this was such a long fuse. They weren't setting this up for a later investigation of January 6th. January 6th was going to be, the first day of the new era, and there would be no questioning of Trump. But if it didn't go right, they thought, I'll screw her up and trip her up with this story that I deny. I don't know whether I buy that or not, but the point that he was making was there are a number of camps in which people are saying, well, the thing to watch for is Tony Ornato doesn't tell the truth about anything.
Well, that's the basic point
okay.
there. Okay.
Right. So there's a lot of people thinking the same thing.
Yeah. Next player, Elisa Farrah Griffin. Don't know if you're familiar with her.
Oh, yeah. I remember her as Farrah, but I didn't realize she was a Griffin now.
Elisa Alexandra Farrah is an American political advisor.
She is.
Who was White House Director of Strategic Communications and Assistant to the President in the Trump administration. And then in 2021, she joined CNN as a political commentator. You may know her from there.
That's where we remember her.
And guess what? She's a Pence person. Griffin was press secretary for U.S. Vice President Mike Pence and special assistant to President Trump from October 2017 to September 2019. Then she became the youngest Pentagon press secretary in history and served as deputy assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs and the press secretary for the U.S. Department of Defense until 2020. So that's who Elisa Farrah Griffin. Republicans all. Solid Republicans. Some of them are Pence Republicans.
How did she do it?
Okay. And she saw Olivia Troy note that Tony Ornato can't be trusted. Mm-hmm. Okay. And Elisa Farrah Griffin said, Tony Ornato lied about me, too.
Oh.
During the protests at Lafayette Square in 2020, I told Mark Meadows and Ornato they needed to warn the press stage there before clearing the square, and Meadows said, we're not doing that, we're just going. And then Tony later lied and said the exchange never happened. He knows it did, and basically what Elisa Farrah Griffin is saying, I know it did, and I know Tony lies, and everybody knows Tony lies. So keep that in mind, that Cassidy Hutchinson told a very detailed story with lots of little details.
That's true.
And, some of it was what she heard. But the point is she did it. She did it consistently. She did it in a way that hung together. And she did it under oath. And Tony Ornato and all the other people who are claiming that an attorney familiar with Pat Cipollone says that he would deny it, that's not under oath.
That is true. That is totally different.
So I think that background's important when you start hearing who the players are and what they're saying about what. So I'm not going to dismiss the telenovela. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. But again, important parts of this, there were people in the Pence camp who were really afraid for Pence's safety, who saw Tony Ornato, who was the director of safety for everybody, as somebody they couldn't trust. They think he lies, and that's all part and parcel of the entire picture here.
Well, good. I think he lies too, and I'd love to see it demonstrated, or at least discussed frequently on CNN or C-SPAN or whatever when they hold those hearings. So
right, and we'll talk about some of the reaction after the break, which is coming up.
But,
Bobby Engel has also already testified to the committee.
Okay.
And Bobby Engel's another Trump loyalist, but he was one of the three people in the car. There was Trump, there was the driver, who's a young, low-level guy, and then there's Bobby Engel. And Bobby Engel is another guy who's in the Tony Ornato Trump camp who basically doesn't want to tell anybody anything. But he is subject to subpoena, as the Clinton case showed, so, he can't hide forever.
I guess not. All right. Well, I'm going to find out some more about Tony Ornato. I think was weird that he was serving in dual roles. He was like deputy chief of staff, but also still on the Secret Service payroll. That seems unusual, too.
That's one of the reasons they didn't trust him.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I have for you here, I told Greg during the break I was going to bring this up. Somebody sent me a collection of screen caps, 4 of them, which I guess, I don't know whether they took them from their own TV watching. Oh, they're nice, clean screen caps, so they must have been watching on their laptop. Of what the closed captioning on the channel they were watching, which was the PBS News Hour, so blame it on PBS News and their closed captioning. They were watching the hearings there, and 4 times that Pat Cipollone was mentioned, there are 4 different attempts at getting that up on screen in closed captioning. The first refers to, we just have snippets of the conversation here, so no setup of an entire sentence. But in each case, she's being questioned, I guess, by Liz Cheney. And there's the first clip here is White House counsel Pat's, as in possessive, P-A-T''S, Pat's Abalone. So abalone, right? The abalone, that's a sea creature of some kind.
You're an East Coast guy. If you were a West Coast guy, you'd know.
Right. Yeah, we don't know anything about that, but they don't know anything about why we're calling him Patsy Baloney. So we're trying to clarify here. But yes, the second capture is in fact Hutchinson referring to Patsy Baloney, and the screen reads, "Did you have any conversations with Patsy Baloney?" Which they spell B-A-L-O-N-E-Y, not even the L-O-G-N-A spelling there, but. So going with the phonetics there. There's also a third which says something, and did you see the writing? in the writing of some speech, shared the draft with Pats If-Aloni, who also believed something. And then finally, there is the most bizarre of the four, referring to White House counsel, that being Pets of Belonging. Pets of Belonging, that's correct. Pat Cipollone, Pets of Belonging. I'm not certain how I can.
Who got it directly from Oscar Mayer Wiener,
right?
Who was told this by Tom Hagen.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's not just that we think that maybe people refer to him as Patsy Baloney on the street. They refer to him that way on PBS NewsHour, the furthest thing from the street.
Well, so some representative tweets about this I thought was worth sharing. Kyle Griffin, Representative Adam Schiff on Cassidy Hutchinson on ABC. Looks like that was today. Anybody who wants to take issue with anything she said should come in and testify to us under oath. I didn't mention, but perhaps I should have, that Cassidy Hutchinson's lawyer said last night she stands by every single thing she said.
Well, there you
go. T. Walsh tweets, Carol Leonnig notes in her book that many in the Secret Service are very skeptical of Ornato and Engel. They felt it was very questionable how close they became with Trump and his team. They were more than his detail. They were enablers of his worst behaviors.
Yes, that's
why it's significant that Engel wouldn't let Trump go to the Capitol. He was really trying to protect his life.
Mm. Oh.
I mean, there's a riot going on.
Well, but that's like what he was supposed to be doing as an agent.
Yeah.
So there he's doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Ornato, very weird. As we mentioned just before the break, that he's serving these dual roles. He's, I think, a Secret Service official and at the same time deputy chief of staff in the White House or something like that. It's very odd. I think unusual, but maybe not.
Yeah. It's like...
I don't know.
Brett Kavanaugh, being a Supreme Court justice, but also deputy chief of staff to the Republican National Committee.
Yes, right. Were that to be, was that the case? Oh my gosh, that's not good.
No, I mean he's not. But I'm just saying, you're not supposed to do these dual roles.
Right. Okay.
And everybody knows Kavanaugh was a political operative before he went into the judge business.
Right, but he was supposedly quit one before taking the other job. And I'm not certain
because then
Ornato
you drop all your political pretenses and then you're pure at what you do. And in Ornato's case, he didn't drop.
Yeah.
He kept both.
Like, what was the other chief of staff, the other acting chief of staff who was
Mick Mulvaney was everything.
Oh, I'm OMB, it was
Mick Mulvaney.
deputy chief of staff.
Who now says, by the way, this is terrible.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this and, God, you guys are a bunch of crooks. Who knew?
Yeah. I didn't figure that out until I was in my 14th job with your
and I have to say, I really don't believe any of it until Mike Pompeo weighs in, so I know what he thinks.
Yep. Okay. We've gonna have a nickname for Mike Pompeo. I'll think of that for a little bit.
Yeah.
Patsy
well, anyway, how is this all being received by Trump world? Well, of course, they're denying it and coming up with these dumb stories that don't last 24 hours because they don't last. So Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony remains extremely damaging. Wall Street Journal opinion. And remember, 30% of the Republican Party or so, 25 to 30%, are lost forever. But there's the rest of them. And we'll get to some of that. Okay. More testimony on Trump's January 6th tirade, says the Wall Street Journal, by the editorial board. Republicans can't afford to look away from the accumulating evidence of his conduct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The biggest news, they say, isn't the telenovela. Oh, here we go again.
Here's the news. Come right in. I thought that was done. You should have answered that call yesterday. Then they wouldn't be calling now.
Well, it was spam.
Oh, all right. Well, stop calling. We don't want any.
Well, I keep telling that, but I keep telling without picking up the phone.
Oh, right. Well, the National Do Not Call Registry was supposed to take care of that.
Yes, and it did not. The biggest news is that Mr. Trump was advised, according to Ms. Hutchinson, that some of the people who were awaiting his January 6th speech had come armed. He was angry that the crowd wasn't filling up the ellipse because some onlookers preferred not to go through the official security check, which included magnetometers, or mags for short, and then relays Ms. Hutchinson's, I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. So she overheard the president, so it was a direct, like, I heard it. And then back at the White House, as the riot unfolded, Ms. Hutchinson said she heard a conversation between White House counsel Patsy Baloney and Mr. Meadows. I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserved it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. Still want to know where those gallows came from.
Yes.
Okay,
well,
so the Wall Street Journal worries that Democrats want to use the January 6th investigation to paint the entire Republican Party as a gang of insurrectionist nuts. But that doesn't mean Republicans should look away from the considerable evidence it's producing about Mr. Trump's behavior that would surely be relevant to voters if he runs in 2024. And don't call me Shirley. Now, this is the Washington Examiner. Trump proven unfit for power again.
All right.
Former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson's Tuesday testimony ought to ring the death knell for former President Trump's political career. Again, these are right-wing Republican papers, and you might say to yourself, well, what influence do they have with Trumpers? They don't have any influence with Trumpers. But there's the rest of the Republican Party. And if you haven't figured out as a Democrat that however you think you don't represent the entire party, Trumpers don't represent the entire Republican Party. Even if they represent 70%, that's still 30% that they don't represent. And in close elections, of course, that's huge. This is Philip Bump. A quarter of Republicans view the January 6th attack as justified. That means 3/4 don't.
Yes.
Republicans are also more likely to blame left-wing activists than Trump supporters for the riot. They still think Antifa was there, even though there's no proof of that.
Dressed up as them.
Yeah, but that's okay. You don't have to convince everybody. You just have to convince enough so that you win the election. Right. Trump supporters raced to debunk January 6th testimony by Drew Harwell in the Washington Post. The former president's backers quickly spun an online conspiracy theory that he couldn't possibly have lunged for his driver's steering wheel because the beast, the limo, doesn't allow it because there's too much equipment in there, and there's a glass plate between the back and the front, which can be rolled down.
Right.
So if Trump wanted to, he could. But that's besides the point. When evidence suggested otherwise, they started to change tack.
Yeah.
Okay, they couldn't say that Trump was incapable of doing it geospatially.
That's one way of putting it. Yeah.
Right? So then they had to say, well, you can't trust Cassidy Hutchinson, who is she? And that's where we got the line yesterday that I thought was very funny about having gone from principal aide for the chief of staff to low-level janitor at a satellite office in Paramus, New Jersey.
That's
but
right.
You're not going to be able to do that. She's too good a witness.
Yeah. Well, it hasn't.
Plus, she's under oath.
So
Plus,
far.
They're going to get corroborating stuff from other people.
Yeah, they likely will. That was certainly the tack yesterday. I had, it happened across one Republican troll whose first line of defense was, you're so dumb you don't realize that the president doesn't travel in an SUV. And then, of course, everybody was showing pictures of him traveling in the SUV, and he kind of does. Oh,
so
well,
this
in
article
that case,
sort of traces the
comes
evolution
something else. Right.
from Trump couldn't have done it. Okay, so forget about the fact that they were in a different vehicle than we spent the whole day, going over. The point is, they said that she's Amber Heard 2.0 because it's a woman and we can attack her, and let's get that crowd.
Yeah.
And, so then it was, well, nobody believes her. Then they should lock her up for lying under oath to, well, even if she's telling the truth, what's the effing problem?
And lock her up also. But yeah, right. So they just move the goalposts over and over again. I don't know why they pretend that they don't know about the SUV. We saw it all the time around here because he was always going to play golf. He always took the SUV to go play. I don't know that
because he could get there faster.
Yeah, and that wasn't off the record movement either. So I have some questions about that whole.
Well, he
thing
preferred.
too,
People have said he preferred the SUV.
Yeah, it was easier to get in and out.
Basically, got him to the golf course faster.
It did. I don't know whether they put his clubs in the thing or not, but there's no room for him, I guess, in the limo, maybe. I don't know. He has taken the limo there, too, but he seems to like the SUV. He likes being up higher. I don't know why.
He likes the ride.
He does. He enjoys that. I think it's easier for him to get in and out of, down the low limo versus the big, high SUV. It seems to be easier for, a lot of people feel that way about getting it anyway. But yeah, they had all sorts of excuses, including for some reason they thought it was like really brilliant to then say, well, yeah, but take a look at him. How easily could he really move around inside of a SUV? Well, you said it, not me, but it's not that hard. There's very little space between it. It's not like the limo, but I don't know. It has nothing to do with anything. And like you said, in the end, it'll all turn more likely on the fact that for some reason the guy who was trusted as deputy chief of staff and tippy top, as Trump would say, of the Secret Service was untrustworthy and can't be relied upon to give you an accurate depiction of events.
Well, not only that, there's more. Because as they were making their statements yesterday,
yes,
essentially the Secret Service itself that said, we will allow anybody who needs to testify, because after all, there's this Clinton precedent.
Nothing you can do about it.
But the very people who said, lunging at Bobby Engel didn't happen. Of course, it is true that he desperately wanted to go to the Capitol and we wouldn't let him.
Right. Well, that was
that part's true.
Oh, you told me all about that.
We protest the fact that you said it was red and it's really blue.
Right. You didn't tell me that. That
so
was
the important part of the telenovela, the core theme, right? The leitmotif is true.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, yeah, you were pretty clear about that yesterday. That was the real issue. Not that stopped everybody from speculating about the other side issue. And even as we were doing it, we should have realized, and many of us did realize, and did it anyway. I ignored my own advice a lot. No, this is a distraction. Don't spend any time on it. Sometimes it's fun to vent and spend some time on that stuff. But
yeah, we were definitely venting yesterday. I listened to the show in retrospect. I was rather agitated, and I apologize for that. But I just sort of get annoyed when people try to steal our democracy. And then lie about it.
It was a good show. You should not. I guess don't listen anymore because you did great. It was a good show. People enjoyed it.
All these phone calls are coming in saying, "Calm down."
That was them calling, but they were trying to sabotage the show.
Calm down. So let's switch topics a little bit. I think we've talked all we can about that one. More is coming. It's only halfway through the hearings. Everybody on the committee says they have a lot more to reveal that you don't know about yet.
They like to say that, and
they've
so
delivered every time they've said it.
Yeah, that's right. They're not. They don't.
And we still have to get to the Willard Hotel meeting and what that was all about, and how that ties into the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers.
And as you know, the hearings are delayed until July. And guess what? Tomorrow is July.
Yeah.
So not so bad.
So I think July 11th or 12th is when we're looking for the resumption.
All right.
Quinnipiac poll out yesterday. Georgia Senate might be a surprise to you. Raphael Warnock 54, Herschel Walker 44.
Oh, well, as you know, if you ask Herschel, 44 is larger number than 54.
Well, that's the problem. People keep asking Herschel, and then he says stuff. And the more he says, the more his numbers drop.
Yeah.
And what I found equally interesting is that for the governor's race, have you seen this poll?
No, I don't think we have.
Okay, governor's race. Well, it just came out yesterday. We didn't cover it on the show.
No, we definitely did not.
You want to guess what the governor's race is?
It is where you get to be governor at the end.
Yeah. You want to know what the polling is?
Oh, yes, please.
So it is exactly tied. You would have thought.
It's a statistical dead heat.
It's a statistical dead heat. You would have thought that after all of this, Brian Kemp would have even a slim but definite lead. He doesn't.
Okay.
Well, so I don't have any recent polling, but Gretchen Whitmer seems to be doing pretty well with the prognosticators who basically say Michigan remains lean Dem for that governor. Again, just like Tuesday's primaries, if you're looking for a red wave, you're not seeing it. Yes, it may come in the House. Everybody says it's coming in the House. It must be true because everybody says it. But the generic ballot is trending toward the Democrats, so we don't know what's going to happen in the House. You have to say Republicans are the favorite for various and sundry reasons. But the Roe-Dobbs decision, don't quite know what to call it, and the effect of the J6 committee is introducing wild card information that really makes it, shall we say, more volatile than the pundits would like, because even though they're 50% wrong anyway, now it's really hard to figure out what's going on, especially with the Senate, with all this stuff going on. So in that light, I thought this was an interesting piece from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Top Georgia Democrats take different paths on abortion limits.
Okay.
Right? Remember, angry Democrats say to Biden and the Democrats, do something.
Do something.
Given the votes we have.
Right. I'll say that. Let's
Right?
do it. Yeah.
And so what? What exactly do you want them to do? Codify Roe? You need the votes.
Yes. Okay, I'll take them.
U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock and Stacey Abrams have each put a pledge to protect abortion rights as the heart of their November campaigns, but the two Democrats, in the same state, I might add, are taking sharply different approaches to how they would do it. Abrams said in an interview that if elected governor, she'd push legislation to protect the right of an abortion before the point of fetal viability, which is considered to be around 23 weeks. You could argue that maybe it's 22 these days. Warnock, by contrast, didn't take a position when pressed on whether he'd support limits if there's a new legislative push to reverse the ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade, the artist formerly known as Prince. It's actually Dobbs, but I have trouble referring to it as Dobbs because, like, everybody knows Roe v. Wade.
Right.
Asked his stance after a campaign rally in Dalton, the first-term Democrat, that would be Warnock, stressed that he wants to focus on the fallout of the Supreme Court's decision that eliminated the constitutional right. In one fell swoop, this core constitutional protection of women and their rights has been undone by extremists, and now we have politicians in the patient's room rather than women and their doctors. Both Democrats have come under attack from Republicans who claim they're willing to support late-term abortions. I'm going to have a word about that. The Democrats, in turn, expect the ruling to mobilize voters outraged by the court's decision. So Abrams' remarks offered the most detail of her plans to scuttle Georgia's anti-abortion law, which restricts abortions as early as 6 weeks, and that's before many women know they're pregnant.
Bad news.
Okay, so it's sort of important to put a lot of this in context. Kaiser Family has a really nice 2019 briefer on what they call abortions later in pregnancy. Okay, abortions at or after 21 weeks. And remember, 23 weeks is considered viability. Abortions at or after 21 weeks are uncommon and represent 1% of all abortions in the United States. Typically, these procedures cost well over $1,000, and that's not including travel and lost wages. And nowadays, travel is even more expensive. They normally require treatment over multiple days. They're only performed by a subset of abortion providers. And the reasons individuals seek abortions later in pregnancy, which is a better term for it, include medical concerns such as fetal anomalies, maternal life endangerment, and barriers to care that cause delays in obtaining an abortion. So people like to avoid calling them late-term abortions because that makes it sound like abortions occurring moments before birth or even after birth. You've heard people like Marjorie Taylor Greene claim that that's what's going on. And whether you're using late-term, post-viability, partial birth, dismemberment, born alive, it's all stuff to make it sound really super icky. But again, we're talking about after 21 weeks. Third trimester is like 27 weeks and beyond. So we're talking about 21 weeks, and even then, it's 1%. So when they start talking about, well, Democrats just want to do these late-term abortions, they're talking crap.
Yes, that's a favorite talking point of theirs. I did see somebody successfully combating it the other day on the air somewhere, and I should note who that was. But that's the thing that they'll instantly do, and they'll say, "You and Democrats, you support abortion right up until birth." Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, it's
That's
not only the talking point that you heard. That report the other day that I relayed to you. You didn't read it, but you heard me say it. So if you have to testify in court, you could say that you heard me say it.
That's right.
Was about Republican operatives, most of them male, I would guess, if not all of them, blowing off the effect of the Roe-Dobbs decision on the electorate, saying, Democrats always overreach, and besides, we plan on obfuscating everything by talking about Democrats supporting late-term abortions.
Right.
So that's part and parcel of the plan, and it's crap.
Well, that's true. I have some other, I guess you would say, breaking news. Now everybody it's erupting on Twitter, but it helps us go back and say, see, I told you so about something. The write-up I have on it now, NBC News has a article published on it. Biden, who's in Madrid, remember he jetted off to Europe rather than face the problem, etc. He's off there
he wanted
for the
to welcome
G7.
Finland and Sweden into NATO.
Important developments, of course, and the G7. Anyway, he's taken some time from his jetting around the world to speak to this issue. Biden now says, after having everybody spend the weekend disappointed that it was otherwise, Biden says he supports an exception to the Senate filibuster to allow Democrats to pass abortion and privacy protections. That doesn't mean they get one, but people spent the weekend and most of the first part of this week saying, I can't believe Biden, he's so ossified in the ways of thinking about the old-timey Senate that he won't even support a carve-out for the filibuster for codifying Roe. And I did say at the time, we went through the same exercise with Obama. And remember, these two guys were close. You remember that they worked together in the past?
I hear they knew each other.
Yeah. Obama did the same thing. We said we got to have a carve-out for the filibuster or something. We got to get it. There were different things we wanted to work on, getting the Affordable Care Act passed, but they were able to engineer that without it. But then finally filling up judicial vacancies that Mitch McConnell was holding up before he even bothered stealing a Supreme Court seat, and he opposed until it turns out all the pressure on members of the Senate from people who had been studying this and pushing for it for years, the Senate Democratic Caucus came around and said, you know what, we can't take it anymore. We're going to have a carve-out for the filibuster for judicial nominations and executive nominations. And Obama said, oh, well, okay. And what happened to the whole opposition of the whole, you didn't want that? I didn't want it to happen, but now that you guys are saying it, I'm okay with it. Same thing. He opposed until the day came when he didn't oppose it, and then he was fine. So if you build the pressure
and why
correctly.
Is that? The reason is that people like Obama and Biden essentially represent the center of the party.
Yes.
Not the center of the country, but the center of the party. That's how they got to where they got.
Yeah.
And so when the party moves, they move.
Yeah.
And as an activist.
Nothing impossible about it.
Right? Not just as an advocate, but as an activist, yes, working outside the party, trying to push them in the direction I think the party should go. I think that's normal and proper evolution. That's our job, to push the party, and it's okay to push.
Right. And
it's the party's job to try to assess where the party is at, so that you can't have Biden, in a so to the left of the party that the party's not going to follow. Mm-hmm. You got to bring the Abigail Spanbergers along with you, the Elaine Lurias, as well as
the ones that are
the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, and their counterparts in the Senate, of course, because it's a filibuster rule. But yeah, you want the consensus to form around those things, and if
it takes a week instead of a day, that's okay. That's not a long time.
It's not a long time, although another good point that has been made. A fair point that, okay, well, now that you knew that this was coming because you got a leak, but even if you hadn't had the leak, for 50 years, you really should have known that the attack was coming and had been thinking about what you would do the day Roe was overturned, and there should have been a plan. And maybe there was, and it was gathering dust somewhere and they forgot about it. But okay, within a week, that thing that was, people were throwing up their hands and saying, forget it with this guy. He'll never get, you know what? By Thursday, he'll get it. But he'll still be in Madrid, jetting around Europe. I can't
believe it took 3 days.
Right.
With him out of the country to get him to be where I wanted. That's incredible. 3 whole days.
Yeah. So,
what am I missing here?
Don't worry about it too much. I'm yelling at you or anything. You did your job. So congratulations. You got what you wanted because you were adamant about it. And people who listened to people like you heard you and said, maybe we should say something different. And then he did. Good for you.
See, everybody
you did
their job.
You did it.
the problem is that the person who finally came around is happy about coming around, and the people who tried to push him to come around aren't happy because now they want to push him to do something else, and that's okay.
Go ahead and do that too. That's
fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't
Move
worry
on
about
to something else.
It's fine.
Or give him
Good
specific
job.
things he can rally around.
Yes, and so also, I mean, I guess we might as well mention it. Don't spend too much time trying to beat people down for having pushed either. It's not worth your time.
Right.
So there's a little bit of both.
Or to put it simpler, keep an idea in your head and always keep in mind who your allies are. Mm-hmm. And when you're yelling at allies, it's because you want them to change their behavior, not because you want to alienate them.
All right. Yes. That's a good point. Not always. There's certainly some people who are like, well, I do want to alienate them. Well, okay.
Look, you're wrong and I'm right, but I need your vote, so I'm not just going to flat out tell you you're wrong. I'm going to tell you that's really an interesting point, and here are the issues we have in trying to get there, but thank you for bringing it up. Keep pushing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right?
Yes.
That's better than, thank you for saying that. Now here's a fundraiser.
Yes.
Am I getting fundraisers? What do you think all those calls are when I'm trying to do the show? I won't make you use the blowhorn.
Oh. Yeah.
Every single one of those calls yesterday and today is, did you hear what happened with the Supreme Court?
That's
we
funny.
need money. Yeah.
That's a good one. Mine aren't even that relevant. Oh, well. At any rate, now we know, and that makes us feel a lot better about all those interruptions. But now we enter the big interruption, the one that happens between Thursday and Monday.
Yeah.
So
well, first we have the small interruption, which is the one that happens between this part of the show and the next part of the show.
That's coming next.
Do you have anybody on today?
You.
Besides me?
No. What do you mean?
Oh, then you're on your own.
Yeah, always. So occasionally we do have somebody
Tony
else.
Ornato denies that you have another hour of the show coming.
I deny that he's not coming on the show. How do you like that? And
I'll
I'll grill him.
Stick around and see.
Yeah, well, I hope maybe he'll come around and I can ask him those questions. But no, we got plenty to cover, of course. And I really should turn my eye to the NATO thing maybe tomorrow. But okay, thanks very much, Greg. Lots of time.
I'll send you a map. Take care.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I don't know whether we made it in time. When we came back from the break, you'll have to tell me whether you heard the boop of Greg escaping out the back door. It's fine. It doesn't bother me at all. I know Greg likes to not have that sound be on the air, but we did the best we could, but we were so anxious to talk about so many other things. We often talk during the breaks, and the 1 minute break I find very annoying because we don't have enough time to finish our conversation. We got extra things to talk about, even though we've just spoken for an hour, which is that's pretty remarkable after 15,000 years of doing this show, that we would still feel pressured to cram in yet more things on a Thursday morning after doing 3 shows of an hour apiece, 3 stretches of an hour each, and still have more. I can't fit it all in a minute. All right. Well, anyway, the things I was talking about. Now I'm all excited to talk about them, but I think I've resolved to keep them for Friday because they're much more Friday shows. And, when we, just reminding everybody, reminding me, as he is in the back channels of the notes, but he said it before, how we very often would meet when we were at Netroots Nation and get breakfast in the morning. For some reason, we were the only people up in the morning. And, the panels were starting. And some of them were like, well, I'm on this panel. Oh, my God. We got to get out of here. No, we have more to say to each other at breakfast. Did you hear about the thing? I did. I'm supposed to be downstairs talking about it now. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, we'll get out of here. But the news, a lot of people are talking about it. There's a lot of things happening in it. So, okay. Anyway, by the way, let me jump back and see, does NBC News have any, what else do you want to know besides the fact that Biden has said he now supports a cutout? I don't know how viable it is, and I don't know whether he's going to get the 2 usual holdouts on it. But I will say, I think we mentioned right up at the beginning of the week that we read did I read it aloud? A Twitter thread just basically saying, look, I think maybe, despite the fact that everybody believes that Manchin and Sinema are unmovable on this subject, and they've certainly painted themselves into a corner. It's not going to be easy to get them to change their mind and change their position about it. But that, look, things have changed. The situation on the ground is different. I don't necessarily agree that they're going to view this, continue to view this as, look, I've said what I'm going to say about the filibuster and I can't be moved. They might. I mean, they are a little weird and, they're not my favorite people, certainly. And they leave a lot to be desired in terms of their flexibility. But, yeah, here we are. It was, we must have read it the other day because it's in my archive here, from Joe Hagan. And I now always will have to introduce Joe Hagan as not Joe Rogan, Joe Hagan, who says, and said, I don't know. When was this? Beginning of the week, I think, though. People are angry and hopeless in the face of congressional math. And I get that. That would be the math of without Manchin and Sinema, we are, a couple votes short of adopting, say, a carve-out from the filibuster for Roe v. Wade. And by the way, it's been very interesting that we're even talking about that. Before I even get into, maybe I should do it after. Just remind you what Joe Hagan had said, right? I get that people are angry and hopeless in the face of the congressional math. I get that. But circumstances have changed. I think it's worth applying fresh pressure. That's difficult to say. Fresh pressure on Sinema and Manchin to kill the filibuster, which people are reluctant to do because they're just tired of pushing against Manchin and Sinema and them saying no matter what the situation is. So, you could refocus and you start pushing on Joe Biden. Remember, at the beginning of the week, I think Joe Biden was saying, well, I don't want to do anything at this point to alienate Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema on anything, but for a number of other reasons. Lots of moving parts always in the dealings with the president and the Senate, and they can tie any two subjects together at any given time. I'm not going to help you on the filibuster Roe v. Wade thing because you didn't help me on the whatever budget thing. So brain now going in 50,000 directions, but now I will just step out of this to share with you, where did I put this one aside? It's in here somewhere. Maybe back in current pocket. But when I say that there's all these moving parts, I had also put aside, where is it? Here we are, the reporting of Sahil Kapoor, who was tweeting this morning and beginning, I guess, last night, news, reconciliation. Remember that? Reconciliation is alive, per 3 sources. Schumer and Manchin are finalizing a prescription drug deal and plan to send it to the parliamentarian in the next few days to see if it, passes the Byrd rule. Energy and tax items are being negotiated. One source touts major progress. Dems hoping to vote in July. Of course, that begins tomorrow. An NBC News article attached to that one, too. And further tweets from Sahil Kapoor continuing into this morning. This is more movement than we've seen on reconciliation all year. A source says it's a product of major progress in Manchin talks, and Senate leadership wants to move forward with a bill on the floor as early as next month. No final deal yet. Joe Manchin's office confirms there's a path forward on drug pricing through reconciliation, saying he has long advocated for proposals that would lower prescription drug costs for seniors. Maybe not. I don't know. He's glad that all 50 Democrats agree, spokeswoman says. And he's still going. Slimmed down reconciliation is not expected to include child care. It's slimmed down, after all, right? Paid leave, cash payments to parents, and other various items in Biden's American Families Plan. Manchin has made clear those shouldn't be in reconciliation. Big uncertainty, ACA subsidies, Affordable Care Act subsidies. So there's a lot on the bubble here, which I'm sure Schumer has told Biden, and I think it would be very likely that Biden would be saying, okay, so the message I'm hearing from you here, Chuck, if they call each other that, is you're walking a delicate line with Manchin. There's some important compromises in the offing. And I'm back on don't anger Manchin alert. Yes. Okay. So then right out of the box after Roe, and we don't know where Manchin is and we don't know where Sinema is, we want to not antagonize them. Yes, but remember that if you don't come out and say you're going to do something right away, you're going to have a rank and file problem. You might not have a Manchin problem. And, I mean, the decision could very well have been, supposing on Monday, Tuesday, I don't, rock the boat too much, and I'm going to get activists angry and upset, but then they'll start to push that we really need to have a carve-out. And then by, say, Thursday, I say, I'd be willing to consider a carve-out after all. And then they say, good, progress for us. Victory, not quite victory, but, progress for us. At that point, you start to have a Manchin Sinema problem. But, at that point, you can probably go to them and say, look, it's been 3 days of unrelenting pressure. I mean, I got to say something. I mean, you do what you're going to do. But, I had to start considering this. I know, but you were supposed to give me cover on this. And now if you don't give me cover on this, I won't be there for you on this reconciliation negotiations. And I won't be there with my votes on the package. So that, they can go back and forth like this. And they're horse trading. And it's kind of the way things are done. And I know it's terrible. You're horse trading with my basic rights, people will say. Yeah, things get horse traded. That's definitely true. And, sometimes the justification is, I understand all of that, but at the same time, we have a real opportunity to do something that will help an awful lot of people and let them live to fight another day so that we can try again on codifying Roe v. Wade. Some people will accept that, and others will say, we're not going to live another day. It's just not going to happen, no matter what you do economically. But it's a fight over where the priorities lie. Anyway, jumping back though to the thinking about how you can change minds. Right, there was the Joe Hagan thread that I was referring to earlier. People are angry and hopeless, but it's worth applying fresh pressure on these guys to kill the filibuster. People fear they will jump parties. This was more of his focus. And Dems will lose power, but Dems are about to, maybe, we hope not, but lose power anyway, and they would become the two weakest members of a radical GOP instead of the two most powerful in the Democratic Party. But they need to hear from the entire party, loudly, in unison, publicly, strategically, boldly, that this is where the rubber hits the road if you're a Democrat, if you won't protect the rights of women and gays and people of color and the right to vote. Why are you a Democrat? You remember this whole thing. But I thought it was possibly particularly important to Kyrsten Sinema that she might say, well, okay, when I said I was never going to move on the filibuster, it was... well, a couple of reasons, but one, of course, it was still widely believed that they would never just overturn Roe. But now we know they will, and that they did. And that's pretty important to me, and it's going to maybe change the way I'm thinking. And, we haven't heard yet whether it will or not, but... another of the justifications, and this came to mind the other day too, was that, one of the things Sinema used to say, and she said in some of her op-eds about these things, and, Manchin has invoked the same thing, is, well, the filibuster, they say, these two say, is what protects us from, we'd have wild changes in the direction of the law with every election. And you'd have, something being legal one day and illegal the next day, and Well, yeah, right. Well, I was told that the filibuster protected us from these wild swings in the state of the law, except now we found out that there's the filibuster. It still exists. We've kept it in place to protect us from these wild swings in the law, but it turns out that we had wild swings in the law anyway. They overruled 50 years of precedent in Roe v. Wade, and yesterday the right to an abortion was legal, and today maybe not so much. lots of, plenty of writing about how quickly that thing turned over. And then, of course, lots of speculation about what else that is considered bedrock rights at this point in this country. We'll find out, well, there's not a long tradition of having them. There's only 50 years in the case of Roe v. Wade, not 200 or 300 or 1,000 years of common law stretching back to the Norman invasion, whatever Alito might want to say about it. But that lots of things that are considered what were considered settled law, I mean, so much so that they were like dead letters in the Supreme Court for decades, but now all of a sudden in danger again. Well, if the filibuster isn't protecting us from wild swings and gyrations of the state of the law, then maybe you're thinking about it incorrectly. If the Supreme Court can do these things with or without a filibuster, well, then maybe the filibuster just isn't worth all that much after all. So, I think there's room to push them and reason to think that they might be motivated to find a way to change their public-facing reasoning about this stuff. So anyway, what happened over in Madrid? Rebecca Shabbat reporting for NBC News, again under the headline of Biden says he supports an exception to the Senate filibuster to allow Democrats to pass abortion and privacy protections. And I guess what I was thinking I wanted to return to here is I'm astonished, really, how far we've come in thinking about changing filibuster rules. Every time I think back to the very beginning of our push to do it initially and how many, for, a couple of years in a row that we were at it, we did this thing very quickly. It's just the information age, making things move more quickly. It wasn't anything I did. But it did move pretty quickly. But there were years, like literally years, that we spent saying, this thing that stands in our way really doesn't have to stand in our way. We can, if we put our minds to it and get together on something, push it out of the way. Change the way things work. Just literally change them. And for years, the response from the Church of the Savvy journalists, and they were doing it, of course, because people in the Senate were doing it because they didn't want to deal with the possibilities. I mean, it's very difficult once you realize that, okay, we are perhaps limitless in what we could be addressing, and the sooner people find that out, the sooner they're going to be able to legitimately pressure us to do any of those things. And we don't really want that in general. But anyway, the journalists felt comfortable in saying, that's not the way it works, like patting us on the head. You don't understand. That's a nice fantasy. But they can't simply declare a new precedent and get rid of the rule that way. It's very clear in the rules what you're supposed to do. 67 votes is what you need to overcome a filibuster on a proposed rules change. And this was despite the fact that what we were talking about was not a new invention, that it had been used before, that it had been used in, relatively recent memory, and within the career span of several members who were still in the Senate who would plausibly remember having done it. But they pretended not to remember it. But anyway, everybody said, no, this is voodoo magic, etc., whatever, until suddenly it became not voodoo magic, and then they did it, and then poof, everybody knew that you could change the filibuster. Then there was this open discussion of these carve-outs. So we'll do this for voting rights, because voting rights is a super important thing, which I never really thought about carve-outs like that. The way I carved up the filibuster in my mind was, at first I didn't carve it up at all. But then somebody said, well, we can't get 50 Democratic votes to get rid of the filibuster entirely. But I can get 50 Democratic votes in agreement on eliminating the ability to filibuster executive and judicial appointments, with the exception, for whatever reason, of the Supreme Court. Then that one went by the wayside too, but Republicans did that one. But at any rate, we went from that's not the way it works to that is the way it works to there are now such things as carve-outs, that there's a difference between the legislative filibuster and the nominations filibuster. And there is, we had to kind of search around for it and found it sitting there the whole time. We didn't have to make it up. But One difference, of course, being, well, okay, why do you have the filibuster on legislation? You have the filibuster on legislation ostensibly, right? The original reason, the fact, of course, that there is no thing called a filibuster anywhere in the Senate rules, and that when the Senate rules refers to the filibuster, they refer to it as extended debate, right? When you're dealing with legislation, usually complex, sometimes many hundreds or even thousands of pages, you can see why, or it's a lot easier to convince people that you're being genuine when you say, I really think that there should be more debate about this, even if you then don't show up or have any debate. But if you say you want more debate about it, well, 1,000 pages, of course there needs to be more debate about that. Whereas when the issue is the nomination of a single person, and they've had hearings, and they've debated for hours, et cetera, with legislation, you can always amend the legislation. I think this is wrong. I simply can't vote for it. If you need my vote in order to get this thing to pass, you're going to have to consider my amendment. And that can take time. But you can't amend a nominee. So the nominee is who it is, and you got to vote up or down eventually. It made more sense to separate the two. But I hadn't thought of it as a carve-out from the filibuster. But then we had to invent the idea of a carve-out from the filibuster for voting rights bills, etc. And the logic is not super strong. The emotion is strong. Like, this is a very important thing. But there's really no logical, legal explanation for why that's a more important thing than some other important things. But we accepted the terminology, and now, interestingly, even though we've never succeeded in granting a carve-out for the filibuster, with the possible exception of, there was a budgetary carve-out, but it wasn't a permanent carve-out. There was a agreement reached between Republicans and Democrats not to filibuster. I can't even remember exactly what portion of the budgetary process it was. Was it raising the debt ceiling? That must have been it. But they agreed not to filibuster raising the debt ceiling so that they didn't have to have a carve-out. Once it got to look like they might succeed in getting 50 votes on a carve-out from the filibuster for a debt ceiling increase, they agreed, rather than allow that to succeed, we don't want that to be on the record. So instead, we Republicans will jump out of the way and find the votes for cloture to give to the Democrats so that they can pass this thing without having to invoke any carve-outs and shut us down. We'll shut ourselves down. And one of the fears, I guess, was if we stick to our guns, stick to principle, if they can get Manchin and Sinema to say, well, this wasn't one of the things we were really contemplating when we said we were against changes to the filibuster. We're okay with this small change to the filibuster because this is going to destroy the international economy if we don't do it, allegedly. And we supposedly believe in that and value it. And so when they started to give hints that maybe this was something that was too important to not do, Republicans got nervous, because if you show them that it's really not a big deal and there is no big backlash against them for voting to change the filibuster, in fact, not even any big backlash for them having promised never to vote for something like this, but then voting for it, then who knows what we're in for. They'll have a carve-out for voting rights. They'll have a carve-out later on. We'll reverse Roe v. Wade after 50 years of fighting, and they'll reverse it. And they won't be afraid to do it either, because they'll have demonstrated to themselves once and maybe even twice by that time that it's painless to do so. So that could be what's afoot here too. Anyway, Biden now says he's okay with it. That'll change the feeling in Washington. That could presumably make it possible for, well, now I guess eyes turn to Manchin and Sinema, and they'll start asking them questions. And then we'll see whether they resent that and whether they take it out on Biden and other Democrats by threatening the reconciliation package. And if they do that, then I don't know. That's bad news probably, but you'll be able to say you heard it here first. So isn't that really more important than the welfare of the rest of the country and possibly the international economic order? I think so. You do too. Let's be honest. Okay, let's see. Other things to share with you today. Well, there's any number of directions we could be going. Let's grab a couple of them and throw them against the wall and see what sticks. Okay, we'll stick with the themes, or at least generally speaking, where we are on the hearings, the investigations, and some of the other various contingencies here. We'll throw this one here. Let me bring back a blast from the past before the next break comes up, as we're wondering about what to do with all these people who are embroiled in Trump controversies. Former Giuliani associate, that's the way he's referred to here in CNN, Lev Parnas, a guy who has had if you believe him, a latter-day epiphany of sorts. He realized Trump sucks and will throw him under the bus. So why should I go to jail for that guy? But it's too late. He did what he did. He and his son are on a frantic PR campaign to change his reputation. I'd like to believe it, but I have some difficulty. Anyway, he's been sentenced to 20 months in prison. So he'll have 20 months or thereabouts, depending on whether or not there's good behavior exceptions, etc., to think about what you've done. And his son can help him think about that from the outside. His son's become something of the Democratic activist, and it's difficult to know sometimes whether to take these things as genuine or not. But as long as there's information that occasionally comes out of the Parnas camp that burns Trump, I'm willing to entertain it. Anyway, this is the news about what's happening to him now. CNN reports this. Mark Morales, Devin Cole, and Lauren Duvall reporting the news that Lev Parnas, former associate of Rudy Giuliani, was sentenced on Wednesday to 20 months in prison in connection with convictions on campaign finance, wire fraud, and false statements. Parnas was convicted last fall on 6 counts related to influence buying campaigns and campaign finance schemes. Jurors found him guilty of scheming with co-conspirators to use a Russian backer's money to fund political contributions they hoped to trade for political favor for their budding joint cannabis venture, which I can't remember whether that preceded or succeeded the liquid natural gas venture. They were multi-front entrepreneurs. But yeah, a lot has changed in Lev Parnas' life in the last couple of years. One being a Giuliani associate / Trump associate. The fact that he's, I believe, Ukrainian rather than Russian, but was working cross-border with some shady Russians, because that's kind of what people in Ukraine did. And then when the new phase of the invasion launched, I think that changed for a lot of Ukrainians, but I guess in particular for him. So, I don't know, a lot of complications in Lev Parnas' life. Anyway, where were we? Jurors found him guilty of scheming with co-conspirators to use a Russian backer's money to fund political contributions that they hoped to trade for political favor for their budding joint cannabis venture. Joint, that's funny, cannabis venture. He also pleaded guilty in March to conspiring to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from investors in a company called Fraud Guarantee. No one ever really figured out why they did that. Called it that. Federal prosecutors said Parnas and a co-conspirator, quote, falsely claimed that the investors' funds would be used solely for legitimate business expenses of Fraud Guarantee, whatever they may be, when in fact the funds were largely withdrawn as cash, transferred to personal accounts, and used for various apparently personal expenditures. Pretty classic fraud. The two defrauded investors out of, and it doesn't say who the other one is, but it's Igor Fruman, I think, was his partner in that one, right? The two defrauded investors out of a total of more than $2 million, prosecutors said. Parnas sobbed while he apologized to victims moments before he was handed the sentence. These are all people that are my friends. These are all people that trusted me and I lied to them, Parnas told the court. Parnas will now serve time in prison for his many crimes. Not content to defraud investors in his business, Fraud Guarantee, out of more than $2 million, Parnas also defrauded the American public by pumping Russian money into U.S. elections and lying about the source of funds for political contributions. Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, said in a statement. That's SDNY in action there for you. Okay, well, that's not their job to forgive and forget. They're supposed to be prosecuting this case. Following his sentencing, Parnas told reporters outside the court that he believes the judge's decision was fair. Okay, now he says, I can admit these crimes now and move on. Parnas was also sentenced to pay restitution of $2.3 million and to 3 years of supervised release as well. In case you forgot the Trump connection, it's all outlined here. Maybe I can remind you, just so you don't feel too bad about poor Lev Parnas going to jail for 20 months. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netflix Radio. Let's spend a little more time finishing up the CNN article, just to remind you what Lev Parnas was up to, and to remind myself, because he's a complex figure. S.R. Haddon, a brilliant, complex figure. Lev Parnas, somewhat less so, but I'm just reminded of the line from the movie. I live my life through the movies, as you know, even though I don't see any new ones. I simply see the old ones over and over again. Anyway, funneling money to support Trump. Ah, yes, remember when he did that? As part of his scheme, the Ukrainian businessman was also convicted for using money from Igor Fruman, who previously pleaded guilty, and a fake company to funnel hundreds of thousands in political contributions to GOP and pro-Donald Trump committees, and then lying about it to the Federal Election Commission. A $325,000 donation to the America First Action Super PAC at issue in the case was first flagged in a 2018 FEC complaint. Parnas's prison sentence is well below the amount of time that he could have potentially served, which is why he agreed with the judge's decision, I guess. He had faced up to 5 years in prison for each of 5 counts, and a 6th count of falsifying records to the FEC, carrying a 20-year maximum prison sentence. We very rarely see anything like that. I don't think I've ever seen anybody sentenced to 20 years for an FEC violation ever. But maybe they should be. Federal prosecutors had recommended between 78 and 97 months, so they were a little disappointed. They did get to make their speech about what a bad guy he was. Parnas and Fruman were arrested in 2019 at a Washington area airport. Who was it just crying about being detained at the airport? Oh, yeah, right. His name came to me and jumped out again. Peter Navarro. Oh, boo-hoo. They singled me out for getting arrested at the airport. They arrest everybody at the airport. That's the way you get arrested these days. It's very fashionable. Parnas and Fruman were arrested at the airport while boarding a flight to Vienna. The arrest came amid the amid the House Democrats' investigation and eventual impeachment trial of then President Trump, and launched 2 unknown Florida-based businessmen, with shaky track records onto the global stage. Parnas ultimately did not testify, but he appeared to seriously consider the move in his own defense. Prosecutors were hoping to question Parnas on his quid pro quo propositions to Ukrainian politicians at Giuliani's behest. And tell you what, he did a good job in getting himself a 20-month sentence. I wonder if that would have changed in either direction. I don't know which direction. If prosecutors had been able to examine him during trial and asked about quid pro quo arrangements with Giuliani and Ukrainian politicians. But interesting. I mean, totally, what a bad climate to have to entertain the idea of getting on the stand to say, oh yeah, I actually helped Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani screw over the Ukrainians and hold up weapon shipments to them, and to have to testify to that now, yeah, that probably would have raised his sentence a little bit. Very interesting and a good reminder. So anyway, that's the news on him. Also on the sentencing news front, I put this one away here somewhere. We neglected to mention it, but might as well. We don't have to give a whole lot of time to it. But Jillaine Maxwell sentenced as well. This is taking its sweet time to open up the piece here. There we are. AP News. Jillaine Maxwell sentenced to 20 years. There's somebody getting 20 years finally for helping Epstein. Jillaine Maxwell, the jet-setting socialite who once consorted with royals, presidents, and billionaires, was sentenced Tuesday to 20 years in prison for helping the financier, if you want to call him that, Jeffrey Epstein, sexually abuse underage girls. Yeah. The stiff sentence was a victory for a group of women who spent years fighting for justice after an earlier generation of prosecutors failed to pursue the predatory power couple for various reasons, many of which were tied to Trump. Epstein, who killed himself in 2019, maybe, while awaiting trial, sexually abused children hundreds of times over more than a decade, exploiting vulnerable girls as young as 14. Prosecutors said he couldn't have done so without the help of Maxwell, his longtime companion. Maxwell, wearing a blue prison uniform and a white mask to conform with coronavirus rules, looked to one side as the sentence was announced, but otherwise did not react. She wore leg shackles that could be heard rattling as she walked into the courtroom. How do you like that? Nice. The sentence was shorter than the term sought by prosecutors, but Epstein's accusers still expressed relief. It's been an incredibly long road to justice for myself and for many other survivors, said Sarah Ransom, one of Epstein's accusers. This is for the girls that didn't have their say, the ones that weren't here. So this does go on at some length, but the big news here, she's going to jail once and for all, and a pretty hefty sentence at that. So that's good news on the sentencing front. All right. Other things to share with you. There's a million things. I don't know even where to start. But let's see. Well, I would have shared this one earlier, but I think Greg did a pretty good job explaining it. There's a Washington Post here, a piece here that pro-Trump web raced to debunk January 6th testimony. Then they got confused. And I think this was the whole thing about the limo and which vehicle he was in and which one's called the Beast and which one's not. And da-da-da. But I think we're kind of over that one. Let's see. Other things to share. Oh, yeah. Maybe I will share this one. People got upset, I think, from the headline of it. I don't know if they dove into the text quite enough. I don't know what to say about this one, but people roll their eyes now when they see a New York Times byline from Maggie Haberman, Luke Broadwater, and Michael Schmidt. And the headline here is, Key Questions Posed by Cassidy Hutchinson's Testimony. The former White House aide's appearance before the House January 6th committee raised a host of issues sure to be topics of further inquiry. And my sense is that people, immediately said, oh, God, they're saying that her testimony was questionable, because it's illustrated with a picture of Cassidy Hutchinson here. He was the only witness to testify the other day. And they're doing the Republicans' bidding. But in my quick reading of the article, it seemed to me like it was a fairly neutral take. And it wasn't that they were asking dumb questions about, and saying, therefore she's questionable. There are unanswered questions like, which was it, the limousine or the SUV? No, I mean, I think they pretty straightforwardly lay out what are the things that the committee and DOJ, if they choose to, if they're interested in pursuing criminal charges, still need to do to connect things. And I think it's a pretty good outline of them. So I thought I might read through it. I don't need to defend these people, and I'll abandon them in a minute if I have to. but I didn't think it was quite as bad as people were making it out to be. For 2 hours, Cassidy Hutchinson, a former White House aide, laid out a devastating account on Tuesday of former President Donald Trump's actions and state of mind on January 6th and the days leading up to it. Her testimony to the House Select Committee and a national television audience raised a series of questions that are sure to be the focus of continued inquiry by the committee, federal prosecutors, and others seeking to flesh out Trump's effort to reverse his election loss and remain in power. Here are some of the key issues presented by her testimony. First being, what does this mean for a possible criminal prosecution? Hutchinson told the panel that moments before Trump went on stage to deliver his speech on the Ellipse on the morning of January 6th, he was informed that people in the crowd were armed with a variety of weapons. And by her account, he responded by urging that security measures be taken down to allow his supporters to fill the area around the stage. And she testified that Trump said he was in no danger because the crowd was supportive of him and that the people there could go on to march to the Capitol. Legal experts said the testimony provided more evidence to support a possible criminal prosecution, even as it suggested that Trump was aware, that Trump was aware for the potential of violence, but went on to urge his supporters to head to the Capitol. During the speech, Trump encouraged the crowd to fight like hell and march to where Congress was certifying the Electoral College results, even promising that he would join them. And by the way, I was taking a look at the C-SPAN footage of the rally just yesterday, and I noticed that, the signage all over, the branding signage, essentially, that was hanging all over the stage from which he was speaking was March on the Capitol, or March to Save America, or something. I don't remember exactly what the march was for, but the march was in the signage, which organizers of the event for the longest time were insisting, no, we didn't have there was no march permitted, and we had no march planned. It was a rally to save America, stop the steal rally, etc., but there was no march planned. But all the signage said march, which I haven't really heard people talking about for some reason. And maybe it's just because investigators have said, all right, well, foregone conclusion, they did plan a march. We're not going to even argue with them about that anymore. I don't know. Anyway, legal experts said the testimony provided more evidence to support a possible criminal prosecution, as it suggested that Trump was aware of the potential for violence, but went on to urge his supporters to head to the Capitol, etc., and even promising to join them. The Justice Department has said nothing explicit about any investigative focus on Trump, but lawyers have pointed to a number of potential charges against him, including obstructing Congress, conspiracy, and incitement. And I keep reminding you, he's set on foot an insurrection. I would just charge him straight up with insurrection eventually. But it's getting closer to that point. Saying, look, let armed people gather here and then let's march them to the Capitol. Let's set them on foot, armed, to the Capitol. That's pretty damn close. I think you're getting ready to make that charge. For months now, the Justice Department has been documenting in court papers how rioters charged in the attack have claimed they were following Trump's orders when they descended on and breached the Capitol. Hutchinson's testimony could place Trump into a conspiratorial relationship with members of the mob, lawyers said, suggesting that he pushed them into action even though he was aware that they presented an immediate threat. I was kind of speculating on that a little bit yesterday, thinking that through and just saying, this idea that he wanted to get to the Capitol and that this was so important to him, why was it? And, well, I was wondering about that and just saying, what would it have changed if Trump had showed up there? There's plenty that could have been changed. Like the fact that what if people who, rioters who have been charged and they've been playing the tape of them in their trials and on television and in the January 6th committee and all over the place, of people on tape saying, I'm here because I was invited to be here. President Trump told me to come here. And, well, that might have changed things a little bit. And what if when they encountered the cops blocking their path, this is what I tweeted yesterday, and they were telling them that President Trump invited us, what if they had been actually able to produce Trump himself? He gets out of his SUV and shambles over to the cops and says, "It's true, I sent them here, and I'm the president of the United States. Get out of my way. Get these barriers out of here. We're going into the house of the people, and we're going to tell them the people are here to say various things for 2 weeks, maybe more, maybe less. I don't know. I'm not certain he knew what he was going to do there. But, I mean, I got some pushback on it, and people are like, well, he would never do that without the support of the military, or, the cops would get, I don't know. But, I mean, I think frontline, Capitol Police, see the president go. I mean, I would say there's every possibility that if I'm a Capitol Hill police officer at that point, I'd be like, I'm assuming that this is a Trump impersonator that somebody hired, because there's no way that the president of the United States puts himself here to do this. But obviously, at some level, somebody's going to be able to say, no, that's a real president. There's no way, unless I really am on the wrong side here. Or, or at the very least, maybe I'm on the right side, but what do I do in the face of the president of the United States saying, I want to go into Congress and I need to talk to the people in Congress about important things that are happening to this country? And, who's the Capitol Police officer to say, no, what was he going to do, Lena? Well, it's separation of powers. There's issues here unless you've been invited. He's not going to do that. He's going to get out of the way. And what if he does in fact do that? And they march in and they march onto the floor of the House and they say, well, all these, you can't come in here. Yes, I can. I'm the president of the United States. I actually have floor privileges. I looked it up. I had somebody look this up for me. And what about all these people? This guy in the Water Buffalo Lodge hat definitely does not belong here. He's a security risk, right? He's got a spear. Let's say no to this guy. He's my personal guest. And you set up one of those really maybe the dumbest immovable object, irresistible force situation ever. Like, what are they going to do? Are they going to shoot the president to prevent him from breaching the Capitol and walking onto the House floor? Are they going to shoot the people he's with? If he says that they're his personal guests, they are not. And he's going to walk onto the floor, and it's going to be on C-SPAN, and it'll be on all the networks. And, I mean, they'll all immediately cut to that, right? In the middle of all this chaos and in the middle of the count, onto the floor of the House strides the President of the United States with a mob behind him, and he declares, I'm in control of this government until we can figure out what the hell is going on around here. And, it's going on. This is the sort of thing, the scenario you see in all the, in the movies about third world countries. There's a TV broadcast that the new dictator announces he's taking over. No one's going to shoot the guy, So I was wondering also, by the way, just out of curiosity, I asked yesterday, has anybody on the January 6th committee or any of the witnesses ever been asked whether Trump or his top advisors or whatever in his circle, ever pondered simply refusing to leave the White House on January 20th, no matter what the outcome was? When they were wargaming everything out, and the whole premise of the January 6th thing is, what if we just don't? What if we just don't accept the outcome of the Electoral College? What if we just don't count the votes of the Electoral College? Will that do anything? Is that enough? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. But we were going to try it anyway. And, I certainly wondered at the time, well, what if he just doesn't leave? What do you do? I mean, is there a shootout between his Secret Service detail and Joe Biden's Secret Service detail? What is the actual physical reaction, because we've never had that, of a president just saying, no, I'm still the president. I'm not leaving. This guy's certainly not the president. I'm not letting him in. What do? One, gang of Secret Service guys is sworn to protect this one. One gang is sworn to protect that one. And is it a matter of, well, are they really personally loyal to them or not? Because, who knows whether anybody would consider themselves personally loyal to Joe Biden on his Secret Service detail. And I don't know. So that might be, one of those things. Anyway, I asked that also because I also said, I imagine the plans, if there ever were any plans with respect to going to the Capitol, and whether he was going to go in or whether he wasn't going to go in and give a speech instead or whatever. I imagine that the planning probably also involved him, talking to Tony Ornato here. Hey, you're loyal to me, right, Tony? If it came down to our Secret Service guys versus Biden's, you'd stick with me, right? And that's an interesting question. Would he? I mean, he's a Secret Service agent as well as Deputy Chief of Staff somehow. So is he a Trump guy or is he a Secret Service guy? I don't know. There's a lot of questions about what this might mean and what he was planning to do and whether this was a backstop to January 6th. What if January 6th doesn't go our way and we just say we're holding up in the White House and one of the top guys in the Secret Service, to whom I suppose some number of Secret Service agents are themselves personally loyal, says he's with me? It's a looming question. It's something we would have to sort out at some point. All right, well, that was a large diversion from the New York Times piece. We'll continue on with some of the other questions. What happened in the presidential vehicle was another question, but we've been over that one and why, if at all, it might be important. But let's see, did they describe exactly who Ornato is in this section or not? I don't know. Well, anyway, they discuss the detail of Secret Service officials, speaking on condition of anonymity, said that both Mr. Engel and Mr. Ornato would dispute that Mr. Trump tried to grab the wheel of the car or that Mr. Engel was struck. They said the two men would not dispute that Mr. Trump wanted to be driven to the Capitol, as the angry pro-Trump protesters, some of them armed, headed in that direction, and Congress was gathered to ratify that he had lost the election and that Joe Biden would be the next president. I don't know. For some reason, people overlook the second half of this paragraph. They want to be mad at Maggie Haberman. I can't blame them. And Schmidt and I forget who else did this one. Luke Broadwater, was that right? Yeah. But the second half of the paragraph, points out the truth, which is that the actual important thing is that, he wanted to be driven to the Capitol to arrive with the mob. It's not that there's a dispute. By the way, speaking of the dispute, Marcy Wheeler, I thought, cleared things up about this a little bit. She just was retweeting Philip Bump, who was tweeting, person under oath says, I was told that this incident happened. Also, the president knew the mob had weapons that weren't intended for him as he directed the crowd to the Capitol. The person not under oath says, well, that incident didn't happen. And Trump allies conclude from this, wow, I guess the whole thing is debunked. But Marcy's saying it's actually worse than that. It's more like a person under oath saying, I was told the president lunged at his clavicle. And a person not under oath says, I didn't file assault charges against the president. Well, all right, but nobody said that you did. It was more about whether or not this thing happened or whether you said it happened. I didn't file charges of assault against the president. That's a different answer. That's not actually addressing the question. But it seems like it is because assault, right? Anyway, I thought that was a interesting clarification of things. Anyway, let's see what the New York Times gang has about this one. Both Engel and Ornato have appeared in private before the committee. It's not clear when they will appear again to answer questions about Hutchinson's testimony. Also unclear when the committee first heard the story about Trump's actions in the vehicle from Hutchinson. I did hear somebody tell me that it was a story that she didn't tell. I think it was. It must have been Sponson who was floating this theory that they had planted this story in an attempt to trip up Hutchinson if she were to testify during the impeachment hearing, the impeachment trials. But she either didn't get that chance or didn't tell that story. And it wasn't until recently, allegedly, when she changed lawyers, that she had a new lawyer that encouraged her to tell this story, who thought it was relevant. And so she told it, and they'll see whether the fuse will still light to debunk her testimony now. We'll see how that one plays out. But if that were the case, it would make an interesting question, though not an essential one. I don't know. You certainly couldn't answer it in court, but here at the hearings you could, to ask Hutchinson, recall her as a witness if Ornato testifies and denies the whole thing. I might recall her and ask, why do you think, given what he says now, that he denies that this whole thing took place or that he even said that, why do you think Ornato said this thing in front of you? Because the setup was kind of odd too. There's really no reason why Tony Ornato would be speaking about something like this to Engel with Hutchinson in their presence, but he appears to have engineered this conversation this way so that she would be there to witness this incredible thing about which no one ever spoke for the next year and a half. That's kind of weird. Hutchinson made clear in her public testimony that she did not have direct knowledge of the incident and remains unclear what, if anything, the committee did to corroborate it. Still, Trump's allies are now pointing to it as a misstep by the committee and using it to undermine the credibility of her testimony. I think that got people angry too. But what else? Did Trump allies try to intimidate witnesses? That's another important question raised here. We might as well just raise the questions. I think you know the background for how they got to these things being questions. How did Trump and his aides react to the violence? And Hutchinson testified a little bit to that, but there'll be more to develop. I think there are probably other witnesses to all this stuff. Is her testimony credible? Well, I certainly think so, but let's read what they have to say about that one. Given the stakes, it's not surprising that Trump allies in particular are seeking to poke holes in Hutchinson's testimony to undermine her credibility. The assertions by unnamed Secret Service officials disputing her account of what happened in Trump's vehicle have provided one way for Trump's supporters to raise questions about her reliability. Her relative youth, she is 26 years old, belies a canniness and intelligence, her former colleagues said. One former colleague, Sarah Matthews, who was deputy press secretary, stood by Ms. Hutchinson and praised her for her bravery. But another former colleague challenged a different portion of her testimony. Eric Hirschman, a lawyer who worked in the White House and who has testified privately before the committee, said in a statement that he was the author of a note that Ms. Hutchinson testified she had handwritten. The note suggested language for Mr. Trump to use to call off the mob storming the Capitol. The note was written on Chief of Staff letterhead and read, "Anyone who entered the Capitol without proper authority should leave immediately." Hutchinson testified it was her handwriting and that Mr. Hirschman had suggested edits. Yet a spokesman for Hirschman said the handwritten note that Hutchinson testified was written by her was in fact written by Eric Hirschman on January 6th. Others familiar with the note's existence said that Hirschman was identified as its author months ago. A person familiar with what took place said that while Meadows and Trump were in the small dining room off the Oval Office, throwing ketchup on the wall, Hirschman walked in and said they needed to issue a statement immediately and went into Meadows' office nearby to grab a note card. He returned and wrote out a message, reading aloud as he went, saying that the rioters were at the Capitol illegally. "How do you establish it's illegal?" Meadows asked. Hirschman responded by crossing out that word. Wow, gee whiz. What a spine on that guy. A spokesman for the committee said the panel understood there was a conflicting testimony about who wrote the note, but lawmakers believe Hutchinson was being truthful and that what's ultimately important is that both White House officials believe that the president should have immediately instructed his supporters to leave the Capitol building. The note memorialized this, but Trump did not take that action at the time. That two people are claiming to have written the same note captures the difficulty in assessing an accurate picture around the events of January 6th, but will also add to questions about Ms. Hutchinson's recollections. So that's the basic gist of it. I don't think that there's that much to be angry at Haberman and Broadwater and Schmidt about from that piece. I think things still stand pretty well. I don't think they've done a great deal of service to the Republicans looking to deny the whole thing. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. All right, that leaves us with almost no time left in the show today, but plenty of time left tomorrow. The tough day tomorrow where we slog through it all solo. But I've got some interesting extraneous information. There's still a lot here. There's a great piece that a lot of people are talking about the Supreme Court and its, as it says here, faux originalism that we'll definitely want to talk about. And stuff unrelated, directly speaking anyway, to politics, to share interesting trends in retail that... I don't know, it sort of caught my eye just because it was sort of bizarre and hard to explain, but would affect a lot of people and maybe was evidence that, I don't know exactly, the future of the economy might be, a little weird, I guess is all we can say. All right, let's see. Anything else that we need to squeeze in before playing the closeout music? I don't think so. I think that's just about it in terms of what we can fit today. Oh, maybe this is something that I wanted to throw. Oh, yeah, you know what? Why not? We'll squeeze this one in here just because it was fun. Jameson Foser the other day making an interesting observation, playing off of Mark Joseph Stern's tweeting about one of the recent Supreme Court rulings. The Supreme Court's first decision of the day on the 27th was Kennedy v. Bremerton, a 6-3 opinion by Gorsuch, in which the court upheld public school officials having a constitutional right to pray publicly. We heard about this one. This is the football coach that led the team in what most people say is coerced prayer during school events. And it was just interesting because, of course, Gorsuch, in delivering the opinion in the court, says at some point, both the free exercise and free speech clauses of the First Amendment protect expressions like Mr. Kennedy's. And I thought Jameson had a very clever and correct take on it by saying, isn't this interesting? From the crowd that can't stop throwing around the words indoctrination and groomer, it seems that the very influential football coach is able to coerce people into doing things that make them somewhat uncomfortable because he's in a position of authority over them. And it's very weird that he would use that opportunity to groom them in the ways of his particular church and indoctrinate them in his pursuit of religion.
From networksradio.com.
But of course that doesn't count.
Listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
And you know it doesn't count because, of course, it was in pursuit of religion, and religious leaders never lead young people astray for illicit purposes, as you well know. And as Justice Putnam himself well knows, and he will tell you once again on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next, unless, of course, he tells you the exact opposite. Stay tuned to find out which it is.